I saw her in the window before I noticed anything else. Upstairs, east side of the house, second floor, the window above the kitchen. A small face behind the glass, looking down at me. I was 100 yards out from the house, running fence wire along the back acres, and she was watching me the way you watch something from a distance when you're trying to decide what it is. I lifted my hand to nod, the way you do when you catch somebody looking. She didn't react. She didn't move. Her gaze slid sideways past my shoulder, into the tree line behind me, and stayed there. I went back to the wire. I'd taken the job 3 days earlier through a referral. A guy I'd done a roof for had passed my name to the owner, who called me once and ran me through the list. Fence on the back acres, well pump cycling wrong, some porch boards gone soft, a tree leaning over the barn. 3 or 4 days of work, cash. The drive was too long for me to do daily, so he'd put me up in a converted shed near the barn for the duration. It was the kind of rural cash work I took every couple of months. Nothing about the call had been off. What had been off was the property when I pulled up. The owner had come out of the house and walked across the yard to meet me at my truck. He shook my hand, told me his wife would be bringing my meals out to the shed, and that I shouldn't come up to the main house. "We like our privacy," he said it that way, neutral, and I told him I understood. I had no reason to go up to the house. He showed me where I'd be sleeping. It was clean, cot, lamp, a small table, a window that faced the barn. There was a heavy bolt on the inside of the door. He didn't mention it. Then he walked me back out to the work list, and we went through it together, task by task. I started on the fence that afternoon. I noticed the bends about 20 minutes in. The wire wasn't broken. The posts were standing fine. But every 50 or 60 feet, the fence was pushed inward, pushed toward the property, away from the woods. The wire was bent, and the staples were pulled at 1 or 2 of the spots, like something had gone over the fence rather than through it, in the same places, more than once. I checked the posts. They were worn smooth at hand height, all of them. Not from wind, not from animals, from hands. The wear was at the same height on every post, like whatever climbed the fence reached for the same spot every time. I fixed the wire and reset the staples and moved on. There were a lot of explanations for fence wear. I didn't think about it again that day. When I walked back to the house at dusk to log my hours with the owner, the wife came out onto the porch with a tray. She set it on the rail and stepped back. Plate of food, a glass, a clean napkin. She didn't say anything. She didn't look at me. She walked back into the house and closed the door. I took the tray to the shed, ate at the small table by the window. The light was on in the upstairs east window of the house. The girl was in it. I couldn't tell if she was looking at me or past me at the woods behind the shed, but I figured it didn't matter much either way. I bolted the door before I went to sleep. Day 2 was the well pump. The pump sat on the side of the property closest to the woods, maybe 40 yards off the tree line. The owner came out and walked me through what he wanted, and as we were finishing up, he looked at the trees and told me, very casual, that I shouldn't worry about the east side. He said they had that side handled. Anything past the pump line I could leave. He just wanted what was between the barn and the creek looked at. I told him no problem. I didn't have a reason to be on the east side anyway. I worked the pump for most of the morning. Around noon, I sat down on the housing to eat the sandwich the wife had brought out earlier, and I noticed I was looking into the trees while I ate. There was a path. It started maybe 10 feet inside the tree line and ran in a straight line, deeper into the woods, until I lost it in the undergrowth. Compressed dirt, no leaves on it, no undergrowth growing up through it. A path that gets used. Animals don't make paths like that. Animals wander. They leave loose tracks. The path widens and narrows. This one held a constant width and a constant direction. Whatever made it walked the same line every time. I walked into the trees a short way to look at it, just a few yards. The path kept going as far as I could see, dead straight, into the dark of the woods. I didn't follow it. I went back to the pump and finished the job. That afternoon, I worked on the porch boards. The girl was in the window for most of it. I stopped looking up after a while because it didn't change anything when I did. She was there. She was always there. I worked on the boards. When I came back to the shed at dusk, my boots were inside. I'd left them on the porch step that morning. I always leave them outside when I'm working a job because the dust from the day gets everywhere if you don't. They were inside the shed when I got back, lined up neat, side by side, toes pointing toward the bed. The wife had brought lunch out around 11. She would have walked past those boots on her way to the shed door. I stood in the doorway looking at them for a while. I didn't ask her about it at dinner. She brought the tray, set it on the rail, walked back. Didn't look at me. Didn't say anything. I bolted the door earlier than I had the night before. Day 3 was the porch boards finished and the tree. The tree was on the east side, out toward where the owner had told me not to bother. He came out that morning and walked me partway and pointed at it, said where he wanted it to fall, walked me back. I cut it down before lunch, faster than I'd estimated. The owner had gone into town. The wife was in the house. I stood in the yard with my saw and looked at the time and the light and the work list, and I had 3 or 4 hours before I needed to be anywhere. I told myself I was checking the property line for tomorrow's work. I told myself I wanted to walk off a stiff back. Both were true. Neither was the reason I went into the woods. The path was where I'd left it the day before. I followed it. It ran straighter than I'd thought. No bends, no curves, no detour around the bigger trees. Whoever made it had cut a line that went where it wanted to go and didn't deviate. The compression was deeper in some spots than others, which meant the path got more traffic at those points. Joining points, other paths feeding into the main one. I didn't follow the side paths. I stayed on the main line. It took maybe 20 minutes of walking before I came out into a small clearing. There was a cabin in it. It was older than the property. The wood had gone gray, and the roof was patched in 3 or 4 different places with 3 or 4 different materials. The windows were boarded from the inside. I could tell because the boards were flush with the frames, fitted carefully. Whoever had boarded them had wanted them boarded for a long time. The door was chained. Heavy chain, looped through a bracket bolted into the door, and another bolted into the frame, padlocked. The padlock was new, brass, clean, the shackles still bright. The chain was older than the padlock, rust pitting on the links, but solid, not weathered enough to be original to the cabin. The cabin itself was older than both, 3 layers, in 3 different ages. Somebody had been maintaining the lock on this door for a long time. I didn't try the door. I stood in the clearing and I looked at the ground. The ground around the cabin was disturbed, not in one spot, in many. A wide ring of disturbance, maybe 20 feet out from the cabin walls, in a rough circle. The shapes weren't right for graves. They weren't deep enough, and they weren't oriented the way graves are oriented. The dirt was packed and unpacked in patches. Some patches had grass growing back. Some were fresh. Some were older than fresh and newer than the grass-grown ones. It was the kind of pattern you'd get if something used the area regularly for a purpose I couldn't name. The patches weren't random. They didn't extend past the ring. The cabin was the center of whatever was happening, and whatever was happening on the outside of it. I stood there longer than I should have. I don't know how long. Long enough that the light started to drop. Then I walked back. I came out of the woods near the well pump and walked up to the shed. The owner's truck was back, lights on in the kitchen. I sat in the shed and tried to make myself go through the work list for tomorrow, and I couldn't focus on it. I kept seeing the ring of disturbed ground. I kept thinking about the chain on the door and how long the chain had been getting replaced. The wife brought dinner out at the usual time. She set the tray on the rail. She didn't walk back right away. She stood there for a second longer than she had on the other nights, and then she looked at me, met my eyes. First time she'd done it since I'd arrived. She told me I wasn't meant to go that far. She didn't say it angry. She didn't say it scared. She said it the way you'd tell somebody they took a wrong turn on the highway. Then she turned to walk back to the house, and before she stepped off the porch, she paused and told me to lock my door tonight. That was the second sentence. Then she went inside. I took the tray. I didn't eat. I sat on the cot with the food going cold, and I looked at the bolt on the inside of the shed door, and I thought about how the owner had pointed at it on the first day without saying anything. I bolted it before the sun was fully down. I sat on the cot for a long time in the dark. I didn't turn the lamp on. I don't know why. I thought about the chain on the cabin door, and I thought about the path, and I thought about the fence wire bent inward at hand height. I thought about all the explanations, and none of them held. The shed window faced the barn, but if I leaned forward, I could see the corner of the main house from it, the upstairs east window included. The light in that window was on. The girl was at the glass. I could see the shape of her shoulders against the lamp behind her. It was past midnight when I heard the porch. The shed had a small wooden porch, 2 steps and a landing. The boards on the landing creaked when weight settled on them. They creaked now. Slow. 1 step. Pause. 2nd step. Pause. Then the weight settled on the landing in front of the door and stayed there. I stopped breathing. I had the bolt thrown, but the door was thin and I knew it. My hand was around the handle of a hammer I'd put next to the cot before I'd lain down, and I wasn't holding it as a tool anymore. The door handle turned. It turned all the way to the stop. It paused there. It released. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I waited for whatever was on the other side to do the next thing. The porch boards creaked again. The weight moved off the landing, down the 2 steps, onto the dirt. Then I couldn't hear anything more. I leaned forward. Slow. I could see the upstairs window from where I was sitting if I moved a few inches to the right. The girl was still in it. Same place, same posture. She wasn't looking at the shed. She wasn't looking at the porch. She was looking at the tree line, the way she'd been looking at the tree line every time I'd seen her since I got there. She didn't react when the boards creaked. She didn't react when the handle turned. She was watching what she always watched, and what had just been at my door wasn't anything new to her. That's when I understood. She wasn't a child being kept inside. She was a child who'd learned what time it came, and had positioned herself to see it. She'd been doing it for years. The window was the only place in the house where she could watch the woods directly, and she was at the window because the woods were where it came from, and she'd needed to know. I sat there until first light, and I watched her watch the trees, and at some point I stopped being scared of what was in the woods and started being scared of how long she'd had to learn this. I packed before sunrise. I didn't bother being quiet. The owners were awake. There were lights on in the kitchen by the time I had my truck loaded, but neither of them came out. I could hear the wife moving around inside. I didn't see her. I looked up at the house once before I got in the truck. The girl was in the window. She met my eyes, held them for a second. Then her gaze moved past me, back to the tree line, and she stayed there. She'd already put me away. I was something that had happened on the property, and now wasn't happening. The trees were what mattered. I got in the truck, and I drove out. I never called anyone. I thought about it. I sat with the phone in my hand a few times in the weeks after. I didn't know what I'd say. I worked at a farm, and the wife told me to lock my door, and I left in the morning, isn't a report. The cabin was on the property, and I'd been on the property as a hired hand, and I'd gone somewhere I'd been told not to go. There wasn't a crime I could describe. There was a chain on a door, and a ring of disturbed dirt, and a fence that bent inward at hand height. None of it added up to anything I could put into a sentence and hand to a police officer. I never went back. I never drove that road again. I avoided that whole part of the state for years. I told myself for a long time that the girl had been watching me work, that she'd been bored or curious, or that the window was just the only place in the house with a view. It was years before I let myself sit with what she'd actually been doing. She'd been watching the woods, past me, every time. The way kids learn to watch for cars. She'd known what time it came. She'd known where to stand. She'd known how to hold still when the porch boards creaked across the yard and not give herself away by reacting. She'd known all of that the way a child knows the layout of their own house. I think about her sometimes when it gets late and I'm somewhere quiet. I think about whether she's still in that window. I don't know if the owners are still alive. I don't know if anyone else got hired after me. I don't know if the chain on the cabin door is still getting replaced, or if at some point it stopped needing to be. But I lock my doors at night, every night. I don't leave my boots on the porch. I don't open windows when something outside makes a sound I don't recognize. I don't take rural cash work where the owner offers to put me up on site. That's what I learned. From a girl who never said a word to me. She just looked past me one morning, and I understood.
If this story stayed with you, consider subscribing. There's always another one coming.